morning, good night, whenever you're watching this or listening to it. My name is Andre Bright. I'm a executive coach and my focus is on burnout. That's the area of expertise I'm looking at. That came from working with different clients and realizing how important burnout was and that a lot of people didn't actually know what it was. So when they're experiencing it, they were completely unawares, which means they wouldn't be able to find a way out. They wouldn't even know what to search for. For those who aren't familiar with burnout, as a term, it's been around since even before the 70s. It's now recognized by World Health Organization as a medical condition, and it's factored by three main areas, which is one, emotional exhaustion, two, emotional exhaustion is basically caring for too much for too long. Depersonalization, which is feeling outside of yourself and feeling like you're not yourself. And number three is reduced sense of personal accomplishment, which is where you diminish your your um, your worth basically, and you think that nothing that you do makes a difference. And then there's obviously things like overwhelm, which is when you feel like there's too much going on at one time for your capacity. Today, we're looking at burnout in terms of boundaries. So I'm going to focus on 5 key steps to help you prevent burnout using boundaries. And this is boundaries with yourself as well as others. And I'll start by sharing a little story, which is my perspective on boundaries, which shifted when I was in therapy, actually. My therapist said to me, like, what do boundaries mean to you? And I described a wall, the usual stuff like a moat. This is something to, keep people out, etc. And he asked me to explore what other ways boundaries could look like. And in the end, we found something that resonated with me a little bit more. It came out as a VIP section. So you have like a velvet rope, you have a little red carpet, you have a different sense of quality in that area. And whether you're familiar with the culture or not, you would recognize these elements as meaning that there's something within this area which is of value or deemed of value in any way, shape, or form. But it doesn't have to be that. Sometimes it can be even more suggested or implicit. It can be just a change in the carpet color. It can be the quality of the food inside. It can be the grade of, whatever it might be. It can be anything. But I think as an idea, we often create this image of such a thick, wide wall with barbed wire on the top, and it has a very hard connotation to it. And so it focuses more on keeping people and things out. Whereas the shift that happened with me is about just showing that whatever is within is of value. Like if you're growing a tree, for example, you might put like a little rope around it, for example, or like a little fence. It's not necessarily to keep people out. It's just to let people know that actually this is something we're trying to grow. Be careful with it. Be gentle. This is something of value that we want to, that we'll be using in the future. What do they say? Like the wisdom of old men is that they'll plant the trees they'll never sit under. It's something we're investing in for the future. And so boundaries don't just keep things outside, but they protect the value of what's inside. But the problem is burnout can happen when there's no boundary set at all. So there's no line between you and other things. Um, Things are crossed all the time, and there's nothing to say, okay, this is my capacity. And if you're someone who struggles with this, you might be a giver, for example, and you tend to be jumping at the opportunity to help people. You might feel responsible for many people and things. You may have dependents. You might have a community that you serve, and you feel like those things are under your care. You might feel like being there for people is a characteristic you wear as a badge. And this is something you're proud of, you know. All those things and more might be reasons why you might be suffering from burnout because there aren't boundaries to help manage your capacity. And so today I'm talking about 5 key steps, and I'm saying steps because I would suggest that you look at these in this particular order to help you build boundaries. Step number one is self-reflection. This is taking time for you to reflect on what your needs are in any time, any way, shape, or form. What are your limits? What is your capacity? What are your priorities? Um, one second. What are your priorities to determine where the boundaries are necessary for your well-being? And these can be boundaries in anywhere, right? They can be physical boundaries, like who do you allow to come within your personal space, um, whether it be in touch in terms of your house, like who do you let in your space, who do you let hug you, who do you um, who do you let into your time when you're booking your time, for example, in your calendar. Who do you actually set time for? All of that is physical boundaries. It might be mental boundaries. Who do you share your thoughts with? Who do you discuss things with? Who do you it can be financial. Who do you let know what your bank balance is? Who do you share your bank account with? Who do you give money to? um, and trust that it will return, for example, right? It can be with your emotions. Who do you go to when you're feeling vulnerable, when you need a hug, when you need to feel seen or heard? It can be anything. Like, I would suggest you go through the wheel of life in all the 8 or 9 sections of it and think about who and what do you share and how much of that you share them with, and try and feel like what feels right to me. And you might find that each individual personal thing has a different level of boundaries. My boundaries with my mum are going to be very different to the boundaries I have with someone who I'd bump into on the street. But I need to have a general idea of that so that when the situations come up, I know what that boundary level would be, and I'm able to set it. So number one is self-reflection. It's for you to actually figure out what your boundaries might be. Another way of telling this is when you feel uncomfortable. If you're in a space with someone, you start to feel a bit agitated or not at peace. If someone has been to your house for a while and you're starting to be like, okay, cool, my battery's low now. All those things are boundaries. That this is your body telling you that you might be reaching your limit in some way, shape, or form. Pay attention to that, especially if you're a giver or you feel responsible. You might brush over those and exceed your boundaries, and then it's a slippery slope into burnout. Number two is time management. And the next word is really important: prioritizing. So, what is your priority list? And one of the things for me that, just to be honest, I had to really reflect on is that I was not on my priority list. I had my family, my friends, God, all these things are on my priority list. But where was I? And this is something I didn't actually realize I was doing to myself. I thought, yeah, I'm thinking about all these people. It was only, again, my therapist who said, so where do you fall on this list? And I realized that I hadn't even put myself on there. And the thing with not having yourself on a priority list is that if you burn yourself out by putting everyone else first, then there won't be anything left of you to give to them in the first place. A friend of mine said that the best gift they could give to anyone else was their own healing. And that meant putting themselves first. There's no point in me being near the verge of death, because that doesn't benefit me or anybody else. you know so time management, prioritizing your time, your energy on activities and people that align with your goals and values, which will give yourself space to rest and recharge. We've spoken about rest and recharge already, and we've actually spoken about values and goals as well. So it's important to know what your values are. Like, what do you stand for? What do you stand against? you know if you find people who are for what you are for, you may find that the boundaries with them might be different to people who don't stand for what you're for, and you realize there's a conflict of interest, or you feel like you're uncomfortable in certain scenarios. Same thing, are they against what you're against? Figuring out what your values, what your goals. Am I trying to get to this certain stage in life at this certain time, and are the people around me um, on that same journey with me? They don't have to be, but just paying attention to those things. The people who are might find that you might need them in your space more than others in some particular points in your life, to encourage you, to help spread the load a little bit, to share resources, all those kind of things, right? Or share network and spend time with them because you feel recharged in their presence, whereas other people don't. Number three is self-care. So number one is self-reflection. You're thinking about what it is that my boundaries could, should, would be. And then number two is prioritizing. So now you know what they are, putting yourself at the top of your priority list and starting to set those boundaries. Number three is self-care. So this is where you set those boundaries for yourself. So you can, this, an example of this is self-care practices, whether it's setting aside time for relaxation, hobbies, activities that bring you joy and fulfillment. And this is really important. You hear me talk about this a lot. When it comes to boundaries, um, one of the greatest weapons we have against burnout is joy. What are the things that bring our energy up? What are the things that increase our capacity to feel? And a lot of that is joy and connection. And so you hear me talking about that a lot. Think about, when was the last time you laughed to the point of tears? Who were you with? What were you doing? And if the last time you can think about that happening was in childhood, then it means that you haven't had joy in the longest of time. Maybe it's worth considering bringing that back into your life. Think about the kind of things you did as a child that brought you joy. Was it roller skating? Was it spending time in nature? Was it being with your best friend and playing games? Like whatever it might have been. Have a think about what were the things that you were doing, who were the people you were with when you were really felt like you were joyful, when you were happy, and try and incorporate those things into your life now as a daily practice if possible, weekly, monthly, yearly. Make sure there were things in your life that create that element of joy, right? But then also rest. We've talked about that at length before. Sleep doesn't guarantee rest. To rest, you need peace. For peace, you need to sort out what's happening in here. If you're overthinking, there might be something you can do to reframe the things that are troubling you so that you can either let go, deal with them, or manage them in some kind of way, right? Because otherwise, you can go to sleep and wake up just as tired because your mind hasn't had a time to reset. So, number one, in terms of setting boundaries to help fight against burnout, is self reflection. Number two is time management, prioritizing. Number three is self care. And number four is communication. So now you've managed to do it for yourself. You've set the boundaries for yourself internally, right? One of the things I forgot to mention about setting boundaries and self care is when you have your values, treating yourself how you would treat others. So, for example, if I know I want to treat myself this way and have an Andre day once a month, do I set that boundary? Do I set that boundary in my calendar and say this is an Andre day, but then someone calls me up and I say, okay, yeah, sure, I'll do it, and then cast aside that Andre day? Two of things are going to happen. One is I'm going to lose trust with myself and self-esteem because I can't trust that when I put myself first, I'm going to keep that promise to myself. And two, I'll be burnt out because that might have been my opportunity to recharge, to reset. And if I don't give myself that, then I'll continue to slide towards burnout. So once you've set those things for yourself and you're creating those boundaries for yourself, so you know how to do it for yourself, you can then teach others how to live by those boundaries that you've set for yourself. And that comes with communication. So how do you clearly communicate your boundaries to others? Whether it's at work, whether it's your relationships with friends at home, you've got to establish and maintain healthy boundaries by communicating. One of the things I've seen that can actually be a really big problem is that we expect people to keep boundaries we haven't told them about. It's like expecting someone to live by a script you haven't given, you know? And one of the things that can be really confusing is we set boundaries with people that we don't keep to ourselves. If I'm telling you to respect my time, but I don't respect mine, how is that a good representation of boundaries for other people to live by? We have to be very careful with that. We have to communicate. Say to them, look, once a week, I have this time off and I don't do anything. It's just a recharge. Just so you know, just because I say it's free time doesn't mean it's your time. And keep by that. Whenever they suggest something, just remind them, yeah, like I said, this is so and so time, so I can't do that. Can we do it another day? You know, Communicate, let people know, especially if they care about you. If you let people know what your boundaries are, if they care about you, they will respect them and they will even help you maintain them for yourself. I always tell the story because I love it with when a friend booked some time with me to catch up one evening and she cancelled on me last minute. And she called me up and said, basically, I intended to cancel on you because you've booked yourself silly over the last few months. So I wanted to make sure you had a night off. So promise me that tonight you do something kind to yourself, you relax and you don't do any work. And that was really important to me because I realized that I hadn't been setting that boundary for myself, but she cared enough for me to enforce that boundary on myself, right? Keep people like that around you who would help you, you know. And when you communicate, pay attention to what their response is, which brings me to number 5, saying no. This is a power move. We have to say no. One of the things about being a giver or someone who feels like people rely on you, that you like to be there for people, is that you find that saying no, what's the word I'm looking for, lets people down. But what we don't realize in that moment, because I've experienced this as well, is that saying no is actually an opportunity to protect you. That's more important in that moment. Okay, so the 5 steps are, in terms of using boundaries to help protect you against burnout, is number 1, self-reflection, figuring out what is your needs, what are your limits, what are your values. Number 2 is prioritizing, time management. How do you protect your time and energy to make sure that they align with your goals and values, etc.? Number 3 is self-care. How do you set those boundaries for yourself? Are you a good representation of what your boundaries look like so other people can see how to treat you? Number 4 is communication. Once you know how to treat yourself, let people know what your boundaries are. Don't expect them to know because they won't. Everyone's boundaries are different. What's important to you isn't going to be important to everyone else. Number 5, once you've set your boundaries with people, is to say no. Protect your boundaries. And one of the things I find with this is that sometimes you're going to need to reinforce it more than one time. Don't expect to just say it once on a whim and they'll just remember all the time. People are people. If they see an opportunity to get something from you, not necessarily in a malicious way, they will try. You know, okay, cool. I know you said you have this time off, but could you just do this last little email for me? Yeah, I know you said you wanted some time alone, but I just really would like to spend some time with you today. Sometimes we have to say no and say, like, look, I did tell you about this. This is something that's really important to me. It's part of my self-care practice. It's also part of me being able to be there for you later on, because otherwise I won't have the capacity to help you in the future. Explain it to them, let them know what it really is. One of the tricks I found when it comes to saying no to people is starting with the why. Don't just say no. And it's actually really important in terms of framing. I'm going to give you an example and you let me know how it feels in the comments. Someone comes up to you and says, hey, I've got this deadline. I know we've got this deadline. And I know you've got this time off booked on Thursday, but we kind of need it on Thursday. Would you mind coming into the office? Your response, no. And don't get me wrong, no is a full sentence, right? Full stop, exclamation point, whatever, however you want to do it. No is a full sentence. And sometimes you don't need to give any kind of background or context. Sometimes you can just say no. But see how this feels instead. Hey, I already know that how important this is, and I would love to be there to be able to help put this over the line. The thing about my time off is it's something to protect me. It's something that I haven't actually had time off in the last 3 months, and I'm really starting to feel it. I've had headaches, I've been tired, and it's something that I really need to be able to perform at a level for you all, because I know you've realized that my performance has been held at a certain standard recently. And that's because I've tried hard, but it's been beyond my capacity, to be honest with you. So I'm gonna need that time off. It feels completely different because now you're giving some context to it, and it's really important to do. So going over it last time, 5 steps to setting boundaries as a way to prevent burnout. Number one, self-reflection. Number two is time management and prioritization. Number three is self-care, how you set boundaries with yourself. Number four is communication, how you set the example of what your boundaries are by communicating it to other people. Number five is saying no, how you protect your boundaries, right? So I hope this has been helpful. And don't get me wrong, all these things are simple but not easy, especially if it's not something that you're used to. And now I'm implying that you do something that's completely different. It's like, oh, what if I've been saying yes all this time and all of a sudden I'm going to say no? Absolutely. And people would understand. You'll be surprised. The ones who actually are good for you will understand immediately. I remember the first time I told someone no. It's wild that I should even be able to say that as a sentence. But I remember the first time I said no to somebody, and they were just like, and there was a lot of anxiety that was building up. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to say no. This is something they really care about. This is an opportunity for me to show them how much I care about them, and I'm gonna let them down. They're gonna hate me. They're gonna turn their back from me. All this kind of stuff is, I've been there for them all this time, but this is gonna mean that our friendship means nothing. What if I lose them? What if they turn around from me, and I lose them as a friend, etc. All these things were going through my mind. And I was going when I received a message for them asking me for something, and I had to really prep myself. I remember doing 2 or 3 drafts of this message, and it ended up being like, "Hey, I would love to. I'm really sorry, but I just can't at the moment." And I pressed send hesitantly, and I was just waiting for the backlash. Like, oh my gosh, that blah, blah, blah. I don't know what I actually expected them to say, but I was really prepping myself for this. Do you know what their response was? Oh no, absolutely. No, I completely understand. I was just seeing if you're available. Listen, thank you so much for it, and take your time. It's no biggie. I'll see you next week. I was like, what? What? Is that it? I was actually shocked. I remember sitting back afterwards feeling so relieved, like the weight of it all was off me. I was like, what? Is this all that I've had to do this whole time? Was just to say sorry, I can't. And I think as well it's the intention, because they know me as a person. They know I've been there in every other situation. They know that if I could, I would. And so I realized then there's also this element of, what is the story that you're giving about yourself? Who are you as a person? Do people recognize that you are a person of value, that you're a person of virtue? You know, are you the kind of person who would just abandon someone in a time of need for no reason? Probably not. So people know that you're going to be doing it with the best intentions. One of my favorite things when facilitating spaces is a rule I set when it comes to setting boundaries of a room, and how we have discussions. Is I say, assume positive intent. No matter what happens, if something challenges you and you're like, "Oh, I don't like the way that sounded, or how that felt, or that triggered me in some way," you assume positive intent. You assume they didn't intend to upset you. They assume they didn't intend to disrespect you. And if that was the case, if they didn't intend to, then what was their intention? And then you focus on that, right? And in this case, remember that people are going to be thinking about that. Like, what is your intent by saying no to them? They'll know that you're not saying no to them for no reason. It's not because you hate them. And if they do get that impression, then you give them what your intent is, which goes back to what I said earlier about saying the why beforehand. You let them know your intent, and then let them down gently, you know? So I hope this has been helpful. One of the things I would say as well is, for those who are really struggling with any of this, because I know none of this is easy, especially if it's a change in behavior for some, especially if it's a change in habit. This is something that's completely different to what you've been used to. Then book a call with me. One of the things I've put on YouTube and Insta on YouTube and LinkedIn is this QR code, which is also up here actually, for us to have a chat. It's a 30-minute virtual coffee call. You can also look in the comments. I think I'll put that in, the link in the comments as well. And if you're on Instagram, I'll put it in the bio. But with just 30 minutes, we'll talk about what you're going through, what you're struggling with. And there are some things I offer. There's a program I'm starting in June, which is for 12 weeks, which really goes deep into this, not just what the issues are, but how to get through them. I'll coach you through certain exercises. We'll do demonstrations. So will create some scenarios to help you through. We'll come up with some scripts. We'll come up with some activities and homework for you to set each week that will help you through. The idea is that by the end of the 12 weeks, you have such a robust system that the burnout becomes a thing in the past. Yeah. So if that's something that's valuable to you, hop on a call with me. Let's have a virtual coffee. Literally a virtual coffee. I actually quite like to have like a little tea or something like that with me while we're having them, because it's very relaxed, it's very casual. And then at the end of that, if there's any more help that you need, then I'll let you know. There's also a community I've got, which is the ICDANE Burnout community, which is on WhatsApp. ICDANE, by the way, is ICDANE. I can do anything, not everything. The idea being that often one of the things that brings us to burnout is that the individual tasks aren't the problem, it's the context around it. Do we have the capacity for it? And we cannot do everything. We don't have capacity for that. So I hope today has been valuable. Tomorrow we're going to have another topic completely. But this evening, if you're watching it live or you're watching it today on the 8th of May, 2024, there is a talk on LinkedIn, and that's at 7 p.m. UK time. And we're going to be talking about the third element of burnout, which is reduced sense of accomplishment. What happens when you feel like nothing you do matters? So I hope to see you then. Book the call. Book the call. Let's talk. Let's see how I can help. And until then, have an amazing